This right here is a book for those of you so deep in social media that it's shaped how you interface with the world away from computers. When your language is so steeped in memes and you've thought about algorithms at least once this week. For those of you so deep down the rabbit hole doom scroll that it's hard to imagine getting back out of it, this book might speak to you. No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood is a novel about someone who's very famous on the internet for doing weird shit and has flown around the world to talk about their weird shit. And is kind of loud and obnoxious, and then has something huge happen in their family that really disconnects them from their online persona, and then they have difficulty reconnecting with the online world that they were once very steeped in. It sounds like a very believable story that I could connect with. Oh well, I looked her up, and her secret seems to be that she's an immensely talented writer, while I just made jokes about K-pop and I ate food loudly. And now I talk about metamodernism and epiphenomenology. It's going great. Which is how I found this book. I recently gushed about Infinite Jest, and I felt the need to read something similar. So I asked ChatGPT to tell me what to read next, and it gave me a few books. The first two I really did enjoy. The second one I couldn't even finish. It was so boring. And this book here, I started off deeply disliking. The first half of it comes from the perspective of a noisy internet icon with poor communication skills. And that could be my own projection here, but she just seemed very shouty, very demanding of attention, and not very kind or connected. I really want to read books about empathetic people now. I've had enough antiheroes, enough flawed characters. Can we just get some characters we actually want to model our lives after? It's way too trendy to be struggling and handling it all with little to no grace. I also didn't really like how the first half of the book is just so full of irony and distance and sarcasm. I'm very bored of postmodern cynicism and the language that the world is falling apart, and so let's just have a laugh because we can't do anything and none of it fucking matters, and so we don't really connect with anything too deeply, and we become both guarded and insincere. Now, maybe it's just the character that's like that, and maybe it's also a sign of what kind of culture the internet can foster. If we are competing for attention, then sincerity and vulnerability aren't really the best way to get it. Because if it was, then we'd be addicted to videos of fundraising for charities instead of cringing at them. What we want is quick laughs and to move on to the next, to not really connect at all. Social media, after all, isn't for connection as it was promised, as much it is for attention and advertising. The second half of the book, though, is what really redeemed this for me and made me appreciate the novel as a whole. Something major happens in the family, and the protagonist is pulled away from her online persona and is connected with her family, her neighborhood, and the people in her community. And after being in a world full of sincerity and kindness and love, she finds it difficult to dip her toes back into the water of the online world, understandably. And so this book does give me a taste of the meta-modern values that I'm looking for. It sways between the ironic and the sincere, but just not often enough. It has more of a hero's redemption arc than a kind of truly meta-modern balancing of both irony and cynicism at the same time, a swaying back and forth. Instead, what I got here was a swing from one extreme to the other. I'd love to see how the protagonist reintegrates with the world after all is said and done. Apart from the plot and effective value meme, the writing style here is really, really good. The book isn't broken up into chapters or paragraphs as much as they are more like long tweets, kind of like half a page of length at most. It's a very new writing style that I'm not used to at all, and one that really adapts to our modern attention spans. And each of these long tweets is just dense and delicious, with loads of unfamiliar language along with some really nice insights. It didn't feel trite or plot pushing at all. I could flip to any page here, read randomly, and feel wowed. Here's an example. Okay, here we go. As the albino Joey was lowered into her arms at the wildlife rescue in Melbourne, she experienced the pang of distrust. Did people feel more connected to this particular kangaroo for white supremacist reasons in the same way that they were still more eager to adopt blue-eyed cats? Worth considering. Still, as she held him, she felt herself grow a deep, elastic pocket at the center of her body to smuggle something away from this continent where the moon traveled backwards and the popsicles were known as golden gay times. America's very racist, yeah? The driver asked her on the way back to the city. Very. she said, and began to explain, but he held up a hand and shook his head. We see it here, he said, every day. The police are always killing those people, even when they only steal something small. Brilliant. And stop. The only thing that bound us together was this belief that in every other country they eat unspeakable food, worship gods more see-through than glass, string together only the most meaningless syllables like goo 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 goo, are warlike but not noble, do not help the dead cross in the proper boats, do not send the correct incense up to the wild blue nostrils, crawl with whatever crawls, do not love their children, not the way we do, bear the most tempting body parts and cover the most mundane, cup their penises to protect them from the supernatural forces. Their poetry is piss. They do not respect the moon, slice the little faces of our familiars into the stew pot. Whoa. Love it. How do we think about people in other cultures? How do Europeans think of Americans? How do I think of Americans? How do Americans think of Europeans? It really makes you think about how you think about people that don't think like you. So I wrote that first half of this review, and then I practiced flipping through different parts of the book, and I found myself really enjoying the parts that I flipped through, which on my first read, I didn't enjoy. So last night, I read through the first 40 pages again, and the book is really starting to grow on me. I'm finding it a lot easier now to connect with the protagonist now that I've drawn awareness to how hard I'm projecting onto her. There's a part of me that wants to keep this book by my bedside table and flip through it randomly the way that I flip through my feed. Except instead of junk content trying to convince me to spend more money, I could get something really well worded and thought-provoking. For now, even though I've finished the book, I'm not done with it. And if you haven't yet, I recommend that you get started with it. And on that note, I actually don't know what I'm going to read next. I'm going to stop asking ChatGPT for recommendations, and I'd really love some of yours. My favorite books lately have been this one, Infinite Jest, Clara and the Sun, and When We Cease to Understand the World. If you have any books that model empathy, I'd really be thankful if you recommend them for me. And that's it for now. Thanks for watching.